Dear grade 8 chemistry students, Salamu Allahi alaykum wa rahmatun minhu wa barakat. In this video we are going to discuss an important concept related to ions that has a title which is classification of ions. At the end of this video we are going to recognize the name and the formula of some ions and to classify ions into monoatomic and polyatomic ions. Don't forget to prepare a copybook and the pen, please. As usual, let us warm up our memories by remembering some important information from the previous lessons. Cation and anion, which are the two types of ion. They are both ions. Cation loses an electron or electrons, while anion gains an electron or electrons. The number of electrons in cation is less than the number of protons, while in an anion the number of electrons is more than the number of protons. The cation is positively charged, oppositely in anion, which is negatively charged. The symbol of cation is capital X N plus, while capital X N minus in anion. And finally the equation that represents the formation of cation is X, which is the atom. We put the arrow. After the arrow we put the symbol of the cation, which is Xn plus, plus Ne minus, which is the number of the electrons lost. While in anion the equation is X plus Ne minus, which is the number of the electrons gained, followed by an arrow, and finally the symbol of the anion Xn minus. Let us start. So, classification of ions according to the number of atoms. Keep attention to the title, please. The number of atoms, not the charge. Ions can be classified into monoatomic and polyatomic ions, which themselves can be cations and anions. Any ion formed when an atom gains or loses one or more electron is known as monoatomic ions. Keep attention to the word "an", which is one atom. So, any ion formed when one atom, this one atom gains or loses one or more electrons, so it is known as monoatomic ions. What is the meaning of mono? Keep attention and don't forget that it always means one. Vice versa, any ion that has two or more different atoms is called a polyatomic ions. What is the meaning of poly? It is meaning many. Take a note. What about the ion that is formed of just two atoms? It is called diatomic ions. The word di means two. So let us solve the application in your worksheet, page 20. The question is, classify the following ions into two groups and give a title for each. So here we have a group of ions and we want to classify them into two groups and give each group a title. So, if you look here, I see that there are a group of ions. Some of them are positively charged while the others are negatively charged. So obviously we can take a group of ions that have negative charge alone and a group of ions that have positively charged alone. As we know, the ions that are negatively charged are called anion, where the ions that have positively charged are called cation. B. Give the criterion used in your classification. What is the meaning of criterion? Criterion means that on what we have depended to make this classification. What is the base of the classification? On what we depend to classify? We classify depending on the charge of the ion. So the criterion used in our classification here is the charge of the ion. What else? Now, in question 2, classify the same ions in two groups and give a title for each group. Oh, in question 1, we have classified these ions depending on their different charges. But here, how can we make other classification for ions? Think, guys, try to find the solution. Anyone know? Keep attention and notice the number of atoms in this ion, Na+. How many atoms does this ion contain or consist of? Just one atom, which is an A. What about an H4 plus? Look here, we have, how many atoms do we have here? We have 1 N and 4 H. So we have this ion is made up of 5 atoms. What about Cl-, which is a chloride, is made up of just one atom, which is chlorine. Look at an O3-, 1N, 3O, so it consists of 4 atoms. So, do you find now the result? Do you find now the solution? So we can take a group of ions that made up of just one atom. Look here, Na+ made up of 1 Na, Cl- made up of 1 Cl, Cu2+ made up of 1 Cu, S2- made up of 1 S, and finally Al3+ made up of 1 Al. So one atom, each ion is made up of one atom. The other group is a group of ions that made up of more than one atom. Here we have 5 atoms, 1N and 4H. Here we have 4 atoms, 1N and 3O. Here we have 2 atoms, H and O, and etc. So here the name of this group is monoatomic ions, while here the name of this group is polyatomic ions. Keep attention here and notice, guys, in this group we have ions that made up of one atom, while here we have ions that made up of more than one atom. More than, this means that 2 and above. So what is the criterion used here in our classification? On what we depend here? Do we depend on their charges? No, there is no sense for their charges. We have depend on the number of atoms in each ion. Okay? So, classification of ions according to the number of atoms. As a summary, ions can be classified into monoatomic ions, which mean ion made up of one atom. At the opposite side, we have polyatomic ions, which are ions that made up of 2 or more atoms. Monoatomic ions and polyatomic ions can be anion and cation. Also, polyatomic ions can be anion or cation. Some common cations. Look here, guys, we have a table that represents some cations which are monoatomic ions. They are all positively charged, so they are all cations. And if we look about the number of atoms, we see that each ion is made up of one atom, 1 Al, 1 Ca, 1 Na, 1 Ag, 1 K, etc. So they are monoatomic. And at the opposite side, we have the ammonium ion, which is a cation because it has positive charge. While is it monoatomic? No, it is made up of 1 N atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, so it is polyatomic ion. Some notes that should be kept in the mind. The name of a monoatomic cation. When we have a monoatomic cation, which means that ion made up of one atom, and has positive charge, how can I name them? Keep this rule in your memory. A monoatomic cation has the same name as its atom, followed by the word ion. So easy. For example, here I have Na+. What is Na? What is the atom Na? It is the sodium atom. True? So if I want to name it now as a cation, I said that I put the name of the atom, which is sodium, just I add ion. So its name becomes sodium ion. What about the aluminum? Aluminum atom here, and I put the aluminum and I write beside it ion. What about calcium? Ca2+. The atom is calcium, and I just add the word ion. So in this way I can name the monoatomic cation. What else? Some common anions. Here I have a table that represents some anions which have negative charges. Each anion is made up of one atom, so they are monoatomic anions. Do we have polyatomic anions? Surely yes. Look here, we have the phosphate, PO4 3-, carbonate, CO3 2-. All of these ions are negatively charged, so they are all anions. And all of them, they made up of more than one atom, 2 or more. Here I have PO4, so 4O and 1P, 5 atoms. And here I have OH, which is 2 atoms, which are 2 atoms and have negative charge, so they are polyatomic anions. How to name the monoatomic anion? Here, as you see, we have a group of anions, monoatomic anions, but how to name them? It is so easy. Just by applying the following rule, we can name them by the name of a monoatomic anion comes from that of its atom and ends by IDE. How? As you see here, I have chloride, which is Cl-. Chloride, the atom of chloride is chlorine, so I delete the INE in chlorine and I substitute it by IDE to become chloride. What about iodide? Iodide was made up of an atom which is iodine. I remove the INE from iodine and I substitute it by IDE to become finally iodide. Same thing repeated with sulfide, bromide, oxide. So and I substitute it by IDE. Here I don't need to write the word ion. Just I apply this rule. What else? The charge of polyatomic ions. This rule is very important. Here I have a group of polyatomic ions which are either anion or cation. For polyatomic ions, the charges are written to the right of the formula of the ion. So in any polyatomic ion, the charge always at the upper right side of the ion. As you see here, 3- is the charge of all this ion, 2- is the charge of CO of the carbonate. Here 1- is the charge of bicarbonate. So this charge applies to the ion as a whole and not to any individual element. So when you see a polyatomic ion, as you see in this table, these charges is for all the polyatomic ion, not for a specific atom in the ion. For example, here I have PO4 3-. This 3- charge is for all the ion, not for P alone or not for the oxygen atoms alone. What about the name? How can I name the polyatomic anion? Just by adding ATE at the end of the name of the ion to become phosphate, carbonate, bicarbonate, nitrate, sulfate. As a summary, A monoatomic cation has the same name as its atom followed by the word ion. Example, Na plus sodium ion, Al3 plus aluminum ion, Ca2 plus calcium ion. The name of a monoatomic anion comes from that of its atom and ends by IDE. Rule 3. For polyatomic ions, the charges are written to the right of the formula of the ion. This charge applies to the ion as a whole and not to any individual element. An application, fill in the following table. Here I have the symbol of the ion. What I have here? Al3 plus. The type of ion according to charge. Look at the charge. It is positive, so it is cation. What about the O2 minus? It has negative charge, so it is anion. What about the calcium ion? What is the symbol of the calcium ion? It is Ca2 plus, and it is a cation because it has positive charge. Finally, with SO42 minus, which has negative charge, so it is anion. What about the type of each ion depending on or according to the number of atoms? Look here, guys, I have Al3 plus, which is aluminum. It is made up of just one atom, which is aluminum, so it is monoatomic. Here I have O2 minus, which is made up of just one oxygen atom, so it is also monoatomic ion. Ca2 plus, made up of one calcium atom, which is monoatomic. And here I have SO4, 4 oxygen and 1 sulfur, so it's made up of 5 atoms. Then it is polyatomic ion. The name of each ion. What do we call the Al3 plus, which is a monoatomic cation? We have said that we put the name of the atom and we add the word ion, so it becomes aluminum ion. Here I have monoatomic ion. Don't forget to add the IDE to become oxide. Same thing occurred with the calcium ion, which is a monoatomic cation. We put the name of the atom, which is calcium, and we add the word ion. Then we get calcium ion. And finally here I have SO4 2 minus, which is a polyatomic anion. Just we need to add ATE to become sulfate. Finally, for the next time, copy and memorize the definition of monoatomic and polyatomic ions. Review the extra sheet of the names and symbols of some ions. I hope that you have understood the content of this lesson and you have get an enjoyable time. تقبل الله أعمالكم. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة من الله وبركاته.